Hello, welcome to our module 5. Remember, this is our last module in this training, the use of voluntary labeling. Introduction. This module will outline the requirement for voluntary labeling, which apply to both prepacked and non-prepacked food. Now, any voluntary food information that is provided must fulfill the requirement of Chapter 5, Voluntary Food Information, Article 36 of EU Food Information to Consumers Regulation number 1169 2011 EU FIC. Now, the objectives of this module, at the end of this module, you'll be able to understand the differences and specific requirement for different voluntary labeling statements. You'll be able to explain why food business operators might wish to use voluntary labeling and when it is suitable to do so. Now, precautionary allergen labeling. Food business owners may voluntarily use labeling such as produced in a kitchen which uses, may contain, not suitable for. Now, this type of voluntary labeling is often termed precautionary allergen labeling, PAL. Now, this can be used to communicate the risk of the unintentional presence of an allergen, for example, milk, egg, peanut, almond, in a food product due to the allergen entering the product unintentionally during product through cross-contamination. Now, precautionary allergen labeling should only be used after a thorough risk assessment has been carried out by the FBO, which identifies a real risk of cross-contamination and therefore a potential risk of injury to food allergic or intolerant consumers. The use of PL or PAL when there is no real risk could be considered misleading. Now, gluten-free or very low gluten claims. People who have a gluten intolerance or colic disease need to avoid food that contains gluten to prevent potentially serious health effects. This means labeling claims about gluten in food are very important to help them make safe food choices. Cereals that contain gluten include wheat such as spelt or corazon, rye, barley, and oat. Now, the EU regulation number 828 2014 set out the rules that apply to statement about gluten. It establishes the maximum levels of gluten permitted for foods to be described as gluten-free or very low gluten. Other statements on the absence or reduced presence of gluten in food are not allowed. The levels are: for gluten-free, 20 parts or less of gluten per million ppm. For very low gluten, 100 parts or less of gluten per million ppm. However, only food with cereal ingredients that have been specially processed to remove the gluten may make a very low gluten claim. Now, manufacturers can only use the phrase gluten-free if they can demonstrate that when tested, their product contains 20 parts per million ppm or less of gluten. Now, they also need to demonstrate that any product claiming to be very low gluten comply with the legislation. When a food is labeled as gluten-free or very low gluten, the cereal containing gluten used as an ingredient to make the product must still be labeled as an allergen. This is because it is one of the 14 main allergens listed in Annex 2 of the EU FIC. Now, for example, a high street baker who is making and selling bread, labeled as gluten-free bread will need to demonstrate that the levels of gluten in the bread are no more than 20 part per million. So I would love to emphasize more on this 20 ppm. So when we speak about gluten-free, remember only food that contain 20 parts per million or less can be labeled as gluten-free. This is very important. Now, this may apply to specialist gluten-free products like bread, flours, and crackers, including food that contain gluten-free wheat stock, as well as processed food which are made from naturally gluten-free ingredients like soups, ready meals, and snacks. Now, the gluten-free label may also be used for uncontaminated oat product. Study shows that this tiny amount of gluten is not toxic to people with celiac disease, and they can eat unlimited amount of product with gluten at a level of 20 ppm or less. Now, for example, a product which is labeled as gluten-free and has used wheat as an ingredient must emphasize wheat on its label or ingredient. Now, use of emphasis. It is possible but not mandatory to include the term gluten in the ingredient lists following the declaration of a specific cereal. For example, stating barley gluten. However, it is the cereal itself, in this case barley, which must be emphasized on the ingredient list rather than the gluten. Free from allergen claims. Free from allergen claims are voluntary. These claims are regulated within general food law, which requires FBO to provide safe food. A free from allergen claim is considered to be an absolute claim. This means there must be a complete absence of the stated allergen within the food, and that it must only be used following a thorough risk assessment by the FBO. Now, vegan food and allergens. When consumers buy vegan food, they might not expect it to contain any trace amount of milk, egg, fish, crustaceans, and mollusks. However, trace amount of cross-contamination can occur when vegan food is produced in a factory or kitchen that also handles non-vegan food. Now, therefore, the food packaging for some vegan product may include a voluntary precautionary allergen labeling such as may contain. This means the product may include traces of allergens such as milk, eggs, fish, mollusks, and crustaceans, which could pose a risk to consumers who have a food allergy to these ingredients. It is very important for consumers with allergies or intolerances to read the label of vegan products to make sure the product is safe for them. So we've come to the end of our module 5. Next, we're going to be going to our knowledge check. So in this knowledge check, make sure you choose the correct answer. Number 1, precautionary allergen labeling is used for the following. A. To warn consumers of the amount of salt contained in the product. To advise consumers of the quantity and quality of the product. To encourage customers to stick to their sugar intake. D. To communicate the risk of the unintentional presence of an allergen in a food product due to the allergen entering the product unintentionally during production through cross-contamination. Number 2, true or false, Rice Krispies are gluten-free. Number 3, oats are safe to eat on a gluten-free diet. Yes, A. B. No. C. Maybe. Okay, we have come to the end of our food allergy and intolerance level 2 training course. and I hope you have enjoyed yourself. Now, the end assessment link is provided at the bottom of this video. So if you want to see the end assessment, please click the link below provided. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in our next course.